Hello, and welcome to CodeWorks. We're excited that you're going to be joining us on your journey to becoming a software developer. In this first setup video, I'm going to walk you through the Windows setup that you need to be able to begin coding on your journey. Now, if you're in a Mac environment, please make sure you stop the video here and go switch over to our Mac environment setup. The things you'll be doing in the initial setup are a little bit different. Throughout the rest of the course, it should be the same, but the setup gets a little bit different. All right, let's move on. So the first thing is we're going to be touching on a couple of different installations you're going to need to do. I'll probably start these installations, but I won't necessarily wait for them to finish. And you may know that sometimes websites change their layout, and the steps may be just a tiny bit different from here to there. For the most part, though, everything we do in this video should remain unchanged. Unless there's major changes, we probably won't necessarily update the video. So if you see slightly different UI, different button layouts, and things like that, I wouldn't concern yourself too much over that. All right, let's jump into some of the things we need to install. Today we're going to be installing Node.js, Visual Studio Code, Git, some BCW tools, and we'll talk about some recommended VS Code extensions. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the Node website to do this. That URL is nodejs.org. I'm of course in English, and download. If you just Google Node.js download, usually this is one of the earliest links that shows up. Now, I'm in Windows right now, and so of course I'm going to come in here to this main page, and I'm going to go ahead and install Windows. Now, this will take a minute to spin up, but I do want to go through kind of the different pages that it'll give me, so bear with me as I let my computer kind of catch up with some of these steps. All right, we've reached the Node Setup wizard. So here I'm going to jump into Next, accept the license and agreement. Of course, make sure you take the time, like all of us do, to read through that, and then proceed to Next. You can leave the default here, Program Files Node.js. You can also leave this as the default for, we're not going to add any extra custom icons or any core packs or anything like that. So we'll go ahead and continue on that. And once again, I will leave this closed. I'm not going to go ahead and go get extra NPM modules or anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Next and then Install. You might get the prompt to say, hey, are you sure you want to allow this? In which case you can hit yes, and it'll begin that process. So I'm going to actually switch over here and jump into kind of our next installation, and that's Visual Studio Code. Now, you may come across tooling for Visual Studio and installing Visual Studio. We're using VS Code. It's a lighter version, and it has all the functionality we need for our course as a part of becoming a developer. Down the road, if you find yourself writing strictly C#, your company might pay for you to get extra licensing to get an actual full-blown Visual Studio suite, but at this time, there's no need to do that, and in fact, it's probably even overkill. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this installation again. I'm in Windows. I'm going to go ahead and start that install. All right, while that's running, it looks like my node got a little pop-up here that is completed, so I'm going to go ahead and finish. VS Code's going to go ahead and start its download and get things rolling on that. And again, for the most part, we should be selecting pretty much all the default options. There's not really going to be a lot of change or customization on this one either. So we'll get that guy installed and opened up. All right, we accept our agreement after reading it thoroughly. You can create a desktop option. I don't think there's really need to. Make sure you do have add path checked. Again, for me, this was started by default. They may add other features and extensions like that here along the way, but here we're just going to call that good, add to path. So I'll go ahead and hit next and install. So while it goes and does that, I'm going to start my last installation here, and that is Git. Git is a source management tool, and we'll actually be using and talking about it more throughout this course. But initially, our Git tools here, we can start that download, git scm.com/downloads. This is going to start that process for us, where we can go ahead and download the Git options. Download for Windows. This one has actually changed a decent amount since the last time we recorded these videos, so I'm not necessarily in a firm belief that it won't change decently again. So again, I apologize if there's extra steps. For the most part, in all these installations, the defaults are probably going to be fine for you. Let's go ahead and check on Visual Studio. Looks like it's good. I'm not going to launch this right this second, so I'm going to uncheck that box, and I'm going to hit Finish. Looks like I might have missed my Git install. Let me grab that again. Come back here in Downloads. There's my Git installation. Alrighty, So I'm going to get again the pop-up. I don't know if it's showing up on the recording or not, but if I trust this or not. So I hit yes. Go ahead and accept our license and agreement. Leave the default install path. For me, I already actually have this installed on my machine, so I'm getting this pop-up. You probably shouldn't. I'm going to uncheck that. Once again, leave all these to their defaults as they were. So go ahead and hit next. We want to, keep that as the default. Okay, now here's a slightly different thing. Choose your default editor used by Git. Ultimately, I usually will come in and say Visual Studio Code because it's something I'm comfortable in and it's something I would want to use. So I'm going to change that to VS Code. I'll go ahead and hit next. Okay, we'll go ahead and let Git decide whether it's default to master. Actually, I'm going to change this here because GitHub has now changed this default to main, and a lot of teams have changed from master to main for their core branch. If that doesn't mean anything to you right now, that's totally fine. Just go ahead and leave it as the default or change it to main. We'll be able to do throughout the course showing you how you can rename your branches as you need to. So I'm going to change it over to main. Hopefully this is something that's maybe available for you still. It might not say new anymore because that is a fairly new development. All right, this one is basically saying, hey, do you want to change your path environment? Ultimately, we're just going to kind of keep the same Git command line. We're not going to change anything like that. But this one I do want the Unix tools. So I'm going to actually change this one here. So look at your options. You're going to look for the one that does add optional Unix tools from the command prompt. It'll give you a couple of pieces of more functionality that we'll be using in the course. If you miss this step, the easiest way to get it back is just go reinstall Git. It's not a major drama, but you might find things like ls don't work in your Windows environment, which would normally list the directory showing the files within it. So if you run into some stuff that commands are not found, this is probably a step you missed. So come back here, make sure you chose the one with Unix tools, and we'll go from there. Lastly, I think this is the last one here, bundled for OpenSSH. Nope, one more. SSL library. Check out Windows style. We're leaving all these kind of the same. Use Minty, and default fast forward or remerge. Get credentials manager core. We'll go ahead and leave that as the default as well. Enable file system caching. We'll leave these experimental options turned off, and we basically just go through there. So the only thing I did change outside of the defaults is I changed it over to use the Unix tools. So while you're getting this installed, make sure that that's the only thing that you change as well. All right, while that wraps up, I'm gonna actually be opening in my search tool. So you may have to go to Windows Start. Unfortunately, it's just off the screen of this recording, but I'm gonna go ahead and pop this open and type CMD, which will bring me up the command prompt. So that's my next step, is I wanna go ahead and open up that command prompt. Actually, I'm gonna let this thing hit finish first. And then CMD gives me the command prompt. All right, so now I'm in my command prompt, I'm in my file system, I can kind of navigate around. If you're familiar with command line interfaces and things like that, this is probably a little more familiar territory. If you're not, there's a couple commands we're gonna run to install some other tools on your system that'll allow us to work through software development. So I'm gonna actually run a command, npm i-g bcw. Now, before I hit submit, let me go ahead and tell you what this does. It says, hey, Node Package Manager, which is actually an online repository of other people's code, I want you to install globally the BCW tool. Now, it shouldn't matter what file directory you're on here. If you do get a permissions error, which I don't think I will, I believe I'm the administrator on this, but if you do get a permissions error here that says, hey, you're not allowed to do that, that throws an error when you tried to do it, other than say npm is not a recognized command. If you get npm is not a recognized command, it means your node's probably not done installing. You may have to close and reopen the command prompt. If you get an error saying you're not authorized to make that step, you'll want to go back into that command tool and you'll right click on that, or you can come down here to run as administrator. Once you run as administrator, then you'll be able to install that. I would recommend for this course though, you probably want to make sure that you're the administrator on your computer so you don't have to worry about kind of working around certain installations. All right, so cool, looks like our installation ran. So let's run a few tests to make sure we got everything working. So if I say node-v, it should print out a node version. You might be on a version later than this. Again, that's something they're frequently updating. So as long as you're above 16.13, you should be fine. Beyond that, we also have npm npm-v. Since you already did that installation, you're going to get a version of npm that's 8.1 or higher. We can also say git-v. I think this is actually version. Yep, it's dash version. Git version, and once again, I'm getting git. Lastly, bcw-v, and that will print out the version. Again, if those versions are later than now, that's totally fine. The only thing I would anticipate is probably some UI updates. There shouldn't be any major changes to some of the utilities that you have to you. And that's it for our primary installation. In the next couple of videos, we'll talk about navigating around in your command prompt, setting up your file system, and getting yourself ready to start coding.